So in my previous video, I talked about some good comparative Windows laptops that I think would be better in terms of performance over the current MacBook Air. And one of those laptops happens to be the Dell XPS 13. And I know some of you are saying, well, I don't like Windows, and that's fine. If you don't have to watch this video. And others are saying the Dell XPS 13 is more of a comparison to the MacBook Pro 13. But here's the thing. This MacBook Air is $1,100, and the Dell XPS 13 with the exact same specs and i5 processor is $1,200. So I think a lot of people looking at the MacBook Air might be interested to know about the Dell XPS 13. Design-wise, they're very similar in terms of weight, 2.8 pounds for the MacBook Air compared to 2.6 to the Dell XPS 13. The 13 is also smaller. It has a smaller form factor. The actual thickness of the laptop is thinner. It's just an easier laptop to carry around. I will give the MacBook Air this though. It is a much better built laptop. There's more finesse in the aluminum. The CNC job is superior. It's not that the XPS 13 is bad. They did a fantastic job. It's just there's no clean cuts around the sides. There's more of an angular cut, making it feel a bit more rough compared to the Air. In terms of ports, they're very much the same. 2 Thunderbolt 3 USB Type-C ports. Both of them are on the left-hand side of the MacBook Air, compared to having one on opposite sides for the Dell XPS 13. Now, the advantage to the Dell XPS 13 is that you do get a micro SD card slot, which is fantastic for expandable storage. One hand test is good because both of these laptops can be opened up using one hand. However, the MacBook Air is a bit easier because there's a little lip on the bottom here, whereas the Dell XPS 13, you kind of have to stick your nail inside and then open up the display. Getting inside the Dell XPS 13 is really easy. MacBook Air, kind of easy, but there's no point going inside because you can't upgrade anything inside of the MacBook Air. Everything is soldered onto the motherboard. The Dell XPS 13, the only thing you can swap out is the storage drive. So for whatever reason, if you buy the model with the lowest storage drive, down the road, you can expand it to something bigger. Battery life is also better on the Dell XPS 13. 15 hours of use before needing to charge compared to 8 to 10 on the MacBook Air. The displays on both of these laptops are good, but there are some key differences. First of all, 13.3-inch display on the MacBook Air compared to 13.4 on the Dell XPS 13. The other thing to note is the bezel size. The MacBook Air looks like it has significantly chunkier bezels compared to the Dell XPS 13. They're not huge, but they're definitely noticeable sitting beside the Windows laptop. The other thing to note is that you do get more pixel density with the MacBook Air. This is a QHD display compared to Full HD on the Dell XPS 13. However, you do have to use a glossy glass display, which will give you more reflections on the Air. The Dell XPS 13 is using a matte display, so there's very little reflection, but it's not touch. And if you want touch, you have to pay more for it, and you'll get a glossy display, or you can buy the 4K option. Now, both of these laptops have good color reproduction, brightness, and gamut, but it happens to be better on the Dell XPS 13. Both are using 720p potato cameras, and I'll let you guys decide which one looks better, but you do get Windows Hello facial recognition to quickly log you in the laptop with the Dell XPS, whereas on the MacBook Air, you have to use Touch ID to log you in. You also get a fingerprint scanner on the Dell XPS 13 that can log you in as well. Sound on both of these laptops are great. Dell XPS 13 is one of the better sounding Ultrabooks this year. Speakers are still downward facing, but they did a good job of getting them loud and getting them to sound nice and crisp. MacBook Air, on the other hand, I personally think sounds a bit better than the Dell XPS 13. Now, performance is obvious. We know the Dell XPS 13 has a more powerful U-series i5 processor compared to the modified Y-series processor inside of the MacBook Air. If you're a developer and you're willing to install Linux or even use Windows, you'll find that your compile times will be faster with the Dell XPS 13. I also like the fact that Dell allows you to change the settings for its thermal management. You have an optimized mode, which runs well, that keeps the CPU temps down. You have a quiet mode, which keeps them down even further. here, and you also have a cool mode, which keeps them at its optimal settings. There's also an ultra performance mode, which allows the CPU to get really hot, but the performance that comes out of it is absolutely bonkers. In some of the tests that I ran, you'll see that the Dell XPS 13 i5, which I have here, will beat out some i7 10th gen computers from the previous year. The MacBook Air, on the other hand, always runs hot. It's just the way it was designed. It's not overheating, it's just Apple allows its thermals to hit 100 degrees. And that also brings me to fan noise, whereas the MacBook Air, the fan is constantly on no matter what you're doing. It's just, it has to be on to help get that heat outside of the chassis. Whereas on the XPS 13, it takes a little bit more for the fans to start getting activated. Now, I will say this though, I gotta give credit to Dell. This is one of the first regular non-gaming Ultrabooks that work beautifully with an external GPU. Like, I connected an external GPU to this, I was able to game on it, I didn't see any drop frames. Sure, the CPU temps are a bit higher, but it's totally doable, and that's kind of nice to see. I never used to be a big fan of Dell's keyboards, but they've improved it. Like, I actually prefer typing on this compared to the new scissor switches on the MacBook Air. They're great, it's a good keyboard, but this has more of a tactile feel, it's better space, and I can type faster on this compared to that. However, I do like the layout better on the MacBook Air. The T-shaped keys compared to this style is just better to use. Touchpad though, giving it to the MacBook Air, like, they're still the gold standard, much more accurate, a lot more space for your fingers to move around on. However, I do prefer the deck on the XPS 13. Like, this carbon fiber feel just feels much better on the wrist than a metal piece of aluminum. So here's the bottom line. The MacBook Air is a nice update from the previous model, and it offers a lot more finesse over the Dell XPS 13. However, I personally feel that the Dell XPS 13 offers a lot more value. It's a lot faster. It has better battery life. There's a bit of expandability. You have the options of getting different types of displays. And you have slightly more ports. The MacBook Air, on the other hand, gives you what most people want when they're looking at a MacBook, and that's Mac OS. If you prefer Mac OS over Windows, then this video is irrelevant to you. But if you're looking like performance to dollar and expandability in the future, you have a bit more of that with the Dell XPS 13. I hope that clears a lot of your questions. If it didn't, and there's anything else you want to know, let me know in the comment section down below. Stay safe, like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.